streamlined in the computers, engineering. I enjoyed math. I enjoyed computers. It was just an assumption in the Asian culture that you do that.
Right.
And I was having a tough time in college saying to myself, I really don't want to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
It's okay, I can do it, but I want to break out and do something else.
Now, you're in a field that's very rarely ventured into by Asian Americans.
Right.
Take a, in taking a look at the police department that you belong to, what's the percent of Asian Americans in the police department? I mean, or numbers or whatever.
I would say less than 10% in the Montgomery County Police Department.
Okay.
10 out of maybe of 100 officers. Actually, it's probably less than that. Probably about 8%.
Okay. And
maybe.
Now, is this typical of police departments across the country, or is this department more progressive in its recruitment?
Are you talking about, well, East Coast, of course, is going to be less, whereas West Coast, you're talking about San Francisco or San Diego.
Right.
You have a more populace of Asians, whereas
Right.
on the East Coast it's not. And I would say this is very typical for suburban police department and metropolitan police department. Of course, those numbers are going to go up, like
Okay.
DC. DC, you're probably talking about maybe 12, 15% Asians in the police force.
Now, why wouldn't Asian Americans pursue this more as a career? Do you think family and not promoting it as a viable career has something to do with it, or do you think it has something to do with the Asian culture and temperament?
I think it's the Asian culture and temperament. The parents, they instill that from childhood, and I know, and a lot of the Asian Americans who are watching this know that that's what instills since you're a child.
Mm-hmm.
Computers, engineering, a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
Anything of that profession is instilled. So.
I lived in the back of a laundry, and we always had the neighborhood policeman walk up and down at night, checking, and he just became a friend of ours.
Right.
He'd drop in every night just to make sure we were okay.
Right.
And never once, did my mother say, that's a career maybe one of you would like
Right.
to think about.
Right.
I mean, it just never dawned on her to encourage us in that direction.
I think it's changing. Before it was considered a white-collar job,
Uh-huh.
and now it's changing to, it was considered a blue-collar job, changing over to a white-collar profession. And especially with the educational standards rising.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because
Okay.
I know in this department that you belong to, there's actually criteria, that just graduating from high school is not enough.
It's 2 years of college, and most of the people I work with they have 4-year degrees. But I think that's a great standard. I think in the near future it's going to change to a 4-year degree because it's being professionalized. You're becoming. I consider myself not an engineer, but a society engineer, people engineer, I would call it. And whereas I'm not a computer engineer or a math engineer, electrical engineer, aerospace engineer. More
Why don't
like
you explain that to your mother? You're still an engineer, right?
But it just doesn't work. But she's proud of me now. She's behind me. She's very supportive. I'm sure she's going to be watching this to see how I do, and she's definitely behind me as far as being Asian police officer, because she knows that number is just so small.
Why is it important to have Asian Americans in the police department? I mean, are there things that occur where your skills or your background would be definitely, important in those instances?
Oh yeah, well the basic thing is language. There's a language barrier. For us being in the police department will open that language barrier, but also to show that diversity. In the near future, I believe that with the more immigration of Asian Americans or any other diversity, you're going to have to mold that police force to equal what's out there in the population. And Virginia, for instance, is one of the larger populace of Asian Americans.
Really?
Asian and the Potomac area also.
Uh-huh.
So we're going to have to mold that. That's like the FBI. They try and mold their workforce to equal what's out there in the population.
So if there's a victim of a violent crime, let's say, that involves an Asian American, would they think to maybe call you in because seeing an Asian American might be somewhat more comforting for that victim? Would that be something that...
That's a possibility, yeah. And I'm hoping that that won't come to that, where they can say a police officer is a police officer. But of course, unfortunately, those factors are gonna jump in,
Right.
and we're gonna need that.
Right.
And it works for every diversity. Females in the police department, African Americans in the police department, Native Americans. Of course, you're going to need that representation, possibly to calm the victims, or to
Right.
show them that, hey, look, we're here to help you.
Now, you are working with gang intervention. Is that what
Yes.
you're doing now?
Yes, that's what I do now.
Now, do you focus on Asian American gangs or just gangs in general?
Gangs in general.
Okay.
Right now, the Asian American gang or the Asian gangs are more or prevalent in the Virginia area rather than
More so than in
more
Maryland.
so than in Maryland.
Uh-huh.
And going back on the fact that the populace for the Asian culture is bigger in Virginia, like Fairfax, Arlington, whereas Montgomery County is a little different.
Okay.
Maryland's a little different.
And what do you do in this division of the police department with gangs?
I do a lot. I do gang collection. What I do is I take all the information that's compiled by officers. I enter them in a database. I analyze them. I help on investigations of gang crimes. I also do gang intervention at schools. If we know there's a troubled kid he's in a gang or he's possibly going in a gang, I work with like the Mental Health Association, social services to get that kid out of that environment. It's a tough job, but that's what we need to. That's what I do.
And now, do you do anything with involvements right in the school? Are you a part of any of the school, the training programs? Because it's important for Asian American
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
students in schools to see an Asian American officer.
Oh yeah. Well, this year we are trying to segue a new program where we're going to be more in the schools.
Okay.
Myself and other officers will be more in the schools, talking to kids, getting to know the counselors and so forth. So
You like that?
I love it. I love it. I love talking to people.
Yeah.
As you can tell.
we can tell.
I can babble. I mean, I can talk and talk and talk. So.
Now, what if your son, right?